Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Google Pixel 5a and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, I will definitely tell you, in a lot of ways, this is still an interesting device to say the least. And what's very funny is this is one of the last Pixels that had a Snapdragon chipset. So it's a very interesting device. I still think it's kind of worth buying for some people out there. But if you want to go and buy a phone that has a little bit more of a future ahead of it, I'll leave some links down in the description for some other devices. You can pick those phones up from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Google Pixel 5a, the thing I will definitely tell you is the exterior is a very beautiful, wonderful phone, and in a lot of ways this is one of those devices that I look at and I'm still very, very happy and excited about the way this phone has aged for the last couple of years. Now, it did come out in 2021, so it is a little bit older now, but it's still not ugly. It's still a very, very good looking phone to say the least. So with this particular device, you're basically getting a phone that is giving you a 6.34-inch OLED display on the front. Now, it's a good panel. I think it's a very, very good phone. And definitely I do think if I'm going to go through and buy a phone, like this panel is still very nice. It is a 60 Hz panel though, so it's not like a super big premium display for the most part. It's a pretty basic panel as you'd probably expect, so that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind here. But I still think for the most part, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, the panel on this thing is still very, very decent for the most part. So that in and of itself is kind of like a big thing to kind of keep in mind here with this particular phone. Now on top of that, with this device, you're still getting a hole punch display too, which is very nice. You're getting a USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is still very, very nice to have. I love USB-C. I love having that on this particular phone too. On top of that, with this type of device, you're still maintaining other things in this phone too. Things like a plastic back. The frame of this phone is aluminum, but it is a plastic back, which really isn't the best thing of all time, but it's still kind of like good enough for the average person. You're probably going to be okay for the most part in this type of phone too. But I will tell you, on the exterior, dual camera setup, the overall build and everything is still very, very nice. And I still think if you're going to go ahead and buy a phone like this, it's still a very good device, There's not really too many things to kind of look at this phone and like be hating on this phone or like think you have a terrible device or anything like that. I still think for the average person, it's still a very good phone, and if I'm going to go and pick one up, it's still a very nice one at the end of the day, at least from the exterior standpoint. So from that side, just kind of keep that in mind there. Now on top of that, when it comes down to the price tag, this phone isn't like the most expensive phone of all time anymore. It's like fairly cheap for the most part, and I do think that is a really nice thing going on with this particular phone, that you can just go ahead and get it. It's not the most expensive thing anymore, and like relatively speaking, for like a fairly cheap amount of price, it's not really going to be that expensive type of phone that you're going to be getting, which is something I really, really love, and that in and of itself speaks mountains to me for sure. So from the price tag standpoint, and this in and of itself again is another very, very cool thing going on for this particular phone, the fact that it doesn't cost that much money anymore. Now from the price tag standpoint, from the camera standpoint here, you are getting a dual camera setup. So for this particular phone, you're getting a wide angle lens, so a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera. You're also getting an 8 megapixel wide angle camera on the front, getting 4K at 60 on the back, 1080p at 30 on the front, and I do think this again in and of itself is another very cool thing going on here. It's a good camera, and I think for the average person it's probably going to be okay. But if you are going to want to take it up a notch, again, this camera is a little bit outdated in some ways. First of all, from the 4K at 60 type of standpoint, there's no 4K at 60 on the front, which again is kind of a disadvantage. So if you're going to go through and if you're wanting the better phone here, this type of phone, is going to be missing out on that type of capability from like not having 4K at 60 on the front. So this in and of itself is kind of a downside, but I do think if you're buying a phone, it's still a very good camera. It's just not the best one anymore, and that's just kind of one of those things to keep in mind here. But regardless of that, it's not a terrible camera when it comes down to it either. Now on top of that, with the software side, it did just end off with Android 14. So that's not that long or old of a version of software ago, like it's still like fairly recent, and I think that's actually kind of nice. The fact that you can buy a phone like the Android 14 device like on this one, and not have like a super old device here, like you can still use this phone for like 2 years and probably still have a good time with it. It just so happens if you're taking it kind of up a notch, this may not be the first phone I'd recommend the average person to go ahead and buy, so just keep that in mind. But Android 14 is way more relevant now than ever, and the fact that 15, 16, you could probably still use this phone because it's still probably going to be getting some security updates. But for now, just keep in mind it's not going to be the best, and the first one I'd recommend people to buy, the Pixel 6, 7, and 8, are still supported with software. This one, not so much. So just kind of keep that in mind there too. Now on top of that, when it comes down to the performance, like I mentioned, this was one of the last phones to bring that Snapdragon chipset from the Google Pixel side. Since then, they switched over to, their, Google Tensor chipset, which is still fairly good for the most part. So in this particular phone, you're basically getting that Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset inside with 6 gigabytes of RAM. And the thing I will tell you about the performance of this particular phone is that it's still like a good performing phone for the most part. Like I do think like if you're trying to use a phone on an everyday basis, this thing is not terrible, and I really do like that kind of stuff when you're going through and buying phones like this. The big thing to keep in mind though at the end of the day is the fact that this type of device, for the most part, like it's not going to be competing that well against like the even current generation Tensor chipsets. Those ones are probably going to be doing a little bit better, but I still think a phone like this, if you're trying to go ahead and load up like fairly basic games for the most part, it's going to be totally fine. I think overall good performance for the most part. It has the same chipset kind of as the Pixel 5. So just compared to the 8 Gen 3 chipset of this day and age or the Tensor G3 chipset, it's not going to be as good, but I still think it's a good phone nonetheless, and I still think there's a lot of capability and a lot of quality within a phone like this too. So overall, what I'll definitely tell you is I like the Google Pixel 5a. I think it's a good phone. I just don't know if this is a phone I'd recommend people to buy anymore. I think there are significantly better phones for people to buy. Things like the Pixel 6, Pixel 7, Pixel 8. Those ones are probably going to be the better phones here, but I still, like I said, I still look at a phone like the Pixel 5a as being a good option for a fairly cheap price. But if you can, I'd minimum probably swing for a Pixel 6a or just buy a Google Pixel 6 or a Pixel 7. They're not even that much more expensive than this one. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.